People often say history is predictable, but what happened in the winter of 1777 in a frozen American valley was anything but predictable, and it changed the destiny of a nation more than any battle ever fought. It began with nothing but cold, brutal, biting cold that scraped against the skin like a dull knife. The Continental Army marched into Valley Forge with threadbare coats, worn-out shoes, and the kind of exhaustion that hollowed a man from the inside out. Many believed the American Revolution had already failed. The British held New York, controlled Philadelphia, and outmatched the rebels in weapons, training, and money. Newspapers in London called the rebellion a soon-to-die spark burned out by winter. Even members of Congress whispered doubts behind closed doors. Yet inside this frozen camp, something extraordinary, almost impossible, was about to happen. George Washington rode through the ragged lines every morning, snow crunching under hooves as he passed soldiers who saluted him with frostbitten fingers. He saw everything: men melting snow in tin cups for water, families of soldiers huddling in makeshift huts, and long rows of footprints stained with blood. Washington himself wrote in a letter, "We are now an army of skeletons." Supplies were so scarce that soldiers boiled their own leather belts to make broth. And yet Washington never showed despair, not even once. His calm presence became the only warmth in a camp where firewood was worth more than silver. He knew that if the revolution was to survive, this place, this valley of suffering, had to become the birthplace of something new. By mid-January, morale reached its lowest point. Desertions increased. Local farmers, afraid of being labeled rebels, refused to sell food to the army. A few rich merchants would only trade at outrageous prices. Washington begged Congress for help, but political infighting stalled everything. Many officers began discussing replacing him with someone more aggressive, someone who would fight the British head-on, even if it meant disaster. Washington sensed the conspiracy forming around him, but did nothing except continue working, calm, quiet, unwavering. Then, as if history decided to intervene, an unexpected figure arrived, a Prussian military officer named Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben. He came wearing a dramatic royal blue coat with gold embroidery, speaking broken English and carrying letters of recommendation from Benjamin Franklin. No one in the camp knew what to think of him. Some whispered he was a fraud, others said he was a genius. Only one thing was certain: he carried himself like a man who believed he could turn chaos into discipline. When von Steuben inspected the troops for the first time, he was shocked. The men were courageous but untrained. They fired muskets incorrectly, marched unevenly, and didn't understand basic battlefield formations. Instead of mocking them, von Steuben rolled up his sleeves and began teaching them himself. He drilled them daily in the snow, demonstrating techniques so precisely that even the most skeptical soldiers watched with respect. His English was so limited that he swore in German, then repeated his commands through translators until every man understood him. He taught them how to aim faster, reload efficiently, and fight together as a single, unified force. Slowly, almost magically, the army began to transform. Washington watched these changes with amazement. For the first time in months, he saw confidence in the eyes of his men. They marched in perfect formation. They drilled with pride. They held their heads higher. Washington felt something he hadn't felt since the war began: hope. But transformation did not stop at military training. Inside the camp, a lesser-known revolution was taking place. Groups of women known as camp followers created makeshift hospitals, nursed frostbitten soldiers, and cooked meals using whatever ingredients they could find. African American soldiers, both enslaved and free, trained alongside white soldiers, unified in hardship and courage. Native Americans visited the camp, offering knowledge about winter survival and scouting techniques. It was the first time in American history that people of such different backgrounds worked side by side for a shared dream. Valley Forge wasn't just building an army, it was building the early shape of a nation. Despite progress, sickness still spread. Hundreds died from disease, exposure, and starvation. Washington attended funerals quietly, sometimes standing alone in the snow long after the final prayer, staring at the graves of men who believed enough in freedom to die for it. He carried their memory with him like a silent weight across his shoulders. Then came a turning point no one expected. In May 1778, word arrived that France, one of the world's strongest empires, had officially allied with the United States. When the news spread through the camp, men cheered, hugged one another, and fired muskets into the sky in celebration. The war suddenly looked winnable. The impossible became possible. Shortly after this announcement, Washington ordered the entire army to assemble for inspection. As he approached the parade ground, he saw a sight that brought tears to his eyes. Thousands of soldiers standing in perfect formation, uniforms patched but clean, their muskets gleaming in the sunlight. They looked nothing like the starving, desperate men who had limped into Valley Forge months earlier. They looked like a real army, strong, proud, unbreakable. Von Steuben walked down the line shouting commands in his thick accent, and the soldiers moved with such precision that Washington later said it surpassed anything he had ever seen. Even foreign officers observed in astonishment, whispering that no army in the world had ever transformed so quickly under such conditions. This new Continental Army marched out of Valley Forge like a force reborn. Weeks later, they proved their strength at the Battle of Monmouth, fighting the British to a standstill in blistering heat. Soldiers who once could barely reload now executed complex battlefield maneuvers flawlessly. The British, expecting to crush them easily, were stunned. Many historians argue that Monmouth wasn't just a battle. It was proof that the Valley Forge miracle was real. Years later, when the war finally ended and independence was won, people called Valley Forge the crucible of the American spirit. It became a symbol of endurance, resilience, and transformation under unimaginable hardship. Washington often reflected on that winter, saying he believed Providence itself guided the army through it. What makes the story truly astonishing is not just the suffering or the training or even the victory that followed. It is the simple truth that the United States might never have been born without the unseen revolution that took place in that frozen valley. Valley Forge turned farmers into soldiers, fear into discipline, despair into unity, and a fragile dream into a nation strong enough to survive against the most powerful empire of its time. Today, when visitors walk through the quiet fields of Valley Forge, it is hard to imagine the blood, hardship, and courage that once soaked the ground. But every gust of winter wind across the open plain seems to whisper the same truth. Freedom was not won by battles alone. It was forged, one frozen night at a time, by ordinary people who refused to give up.